sweaty. Your chest is tight, right? There's that ball in it. And it's difficult to breathe. Are you feeling this? You remembering the last time this happened? Andy's like, no, that never happens to me. Okay, it happens to me, I guess. I don't know. And you're acutely aware of every minute sound. So for me, I was always really thankful that the roommate sleeping next door was there, even though, of course, she could do nothing to help me if someone was really dangerous in my room. But it gets even weirder than that, right? When Chip is gone, I have a 16-month-old daughter, and when I wake up in the middle of the night and hear those noises, I'm like, oh, thank God. There's a baby in this house. Which is a little bit silly, but it brings me comfort. So I don't know about you, but this is also how I feel when I'm facing situations where I have to make the right choice, but it's going to be uncomfortable, right? I don't know, I get that tight feeling in my chest because I have to talk my friend out of driving because they just drank too much. Or I have to talk to a friend who's drinking too much too often, and I brought this up, but it's now like ringing. I just want to keep track of my time. Okay, a friend who's drinking too much too often, I have to go talk to them. Or asking my boss if the paid kitchen staff in the restaurant I worked at, if they were paid a legal wage, even though their legality was maybe in question, and knowing that it could cost me my job, because, obviously my boss would be like, that's not your place, or he'd be like, no, and I'd have to leave because I couldn't stay if that was the case. Or just standing up to your friends, and you're worried that it's just going to be you standing up against them for someone else, right? I feel that ball of tension in me. But you know what makes me feel better? The baby. Okay, not actually my baby, but someone who's willing to do it with me. My friend who's willing to go talk to our other friend with me. Or knowing that at the restaurant there are other people who feel the same way as I do. Or just another friend who's willing to stand up with you against your other friends, right? You have comfort knowing your friends are with you, but that there's community around you. So what I want to talk about today is actually not being terrified. It's about internships. They could be terrifying, right? It's possible. So we want to talk about integrity in internships. So essentially, how do we act morally in our work? What I want to talk about. So it could be terrifying, right? Even if it means, right, losing the internship, or maybe losing the great reference from the internship, or taking an ethical stand that you know is the right thing, but everyone else is going to think you're crazy because they have a different ethic, so they're going to think you're actually unethical in the stand that you take, because they have a different standard of ethics, right? So one reason I want to talk about this is because I think it's tempting for you to be like, you know what, it's easier to do the right thing when you're an adult. Possible. But I'm an adult now, and I think, oh, it was so much easier to do the right thing when I was a kid, because then when you're a kid, right, you do the right thing, and whether or not good things come out of it, your parents make sure good things come out of it because they want you to do the right thing, right? But you're kind of in that in-between stage. You're not kids. Your parents aren't fixing the outcome so that when you make the right decision, everything works out well. But you're not exactly, you're adults, but you're not in the workforce yet, right? So you might think it's easy to say, I'll think about that later. I'll think about doing the right thing with integrity or acting ethically in work when I actually get to my job. So I thought we should start thinking about it now. Why not? Friday night. Hey, let's talk about ethics. So what I want to do is talk about 3 parts. I want to do this in 3 parts. Am I the one clicking this? Where do I point?
Is it on?
Well, I thought I turned it on. Is it this button that turns it on?
No, it's the side. On the side.
Oh, on. Oh.
Yeah.
Lots of on buttons tonight. Here we go. Sorry, Chris.
It's all right.
All right. So this is loud. Okay. My outline for you tonight is up here. I want to talk about a basic framework for morality. Doesn't that sound fun? I want to do a case study from Scripture to talk about 2 things, right? How doing the right thing is easier in community, and how forming habits now in internships will help you later in the workforce. And then lastly, I actually want us to practice doing this. I think it'll be fun. I really do. So let's get there. So morality, ethics, it's a huge topic. We don't really have time to dive into it super deeply, which I'm sure you're all very thankful about. So I just decided to pick a very simple framework from someone who we quote as much as the Bible. Sometimes we think maybe he even wrote the Bible. We love him at YFA. We love him as Christians. Anybody? C.S. Lewis, yay, yes. Okay, C.S. Lewis. So he says that ethics is concerned with three things. I even put it up here for you. You still have to listen to me, but it's up there. Okay, so the first thing he's concerned about is fair play and harmony between individuals, right? Second, what he might call tidying up or harmonizing inside of ourselves. And then thirdly, the general purpose of human life as a whole. So again, between other people, right, that's the first part. Harmony and fair play between individuals. Harmonizing within yourself. And then lastly, the purpose of the human life as a whole. He gives two illustrations. This is like totally from Mere Christianity, so if you've read it, you might remember beginning of the second book, chapter 1, I think. Okay, he says this. He says that a voyage will be successful only in the first place if the ships do not collide and get in one another's way. And secondly, if the ship is seaworthy and has engines in good order. And as a matter of fact, you can't have either of these two things without the other, right? So if the ship keeps on having collisions, they'll not remain seaworthy, right? But if their steering gears are out of order, they will also not be able to avoid having collisions, right? Okay. But we still haven't asked the question of where are the fleets going? Where are these ships going? Where are they trying to get to? And so however well the ships sail, right, not running into each other, they have good working order, if they fail to get to the place they were supposed to go, right, like they're supposed to go to England, but they end up in Calcutta, not working, right? Okay, so that's the first analogy. The second one is an example of a band. You know, if you're kind of sea people, there you go. If you're kind of musical people, here we go. Each player has an individual instrument that must be in tune, right? And it must come in at the right moment to work with everyone else. So it combines with all the others to make a beautiful sound, right? But the instruments might be tuned and they might come in at the right time, but if they were hired to play dance music and they're playing like a dirge, then that's not going to work either, right? So they get two parts right, but the last part is really important. So what does this mean for internships and integrity? Well, for bands and fleets to work properly, they need to do three things, right? They're up here. The three things they need to do are they need to work corporately with individual responsibility while working towards the common, aka correct, goal. And that's ethics, you know, in 5 minutes or 3 minutes or something. If you're studying ethics here at Yale, sorry, it's very quick. At the Div school, yeah, don't tell the Div students. All right. But it's Lewis, so you can't blame me. All right, so the way to do ethics is to think corporately, not just about yourself, right? So sitting in Bath Library ain't going to get it done, right? It's not going to teach you how you're, thank you, yeah. It's not going to teach you how you're hurting other people, how your ships are colliding into each other, or how your ship isn't working inside, right? It's not. You've got to do it in community. So there are many examples of this. You can find a lot of examples, but I just thought, you know, close to home, right here in New York City, there is a Center of Faith and Work, and it's run out of Redeemer Presbyterian Church. I just had to get a Presbyterian reference in there. I know you were all waiting for it, so there it is. I'll do the Old Testament in a little bit. So Redeemer has this center called Center for Faith and Work, right? And it's just people getting together to talk about how they can have social corporate responsibility is what they call it. And that's really Lewis's first point, right? How do we work socially, responsibly, corporately together? So they support each other and they challenge each other. So the reality of the situation is that we need people around us to help us think about ethics, right? We need to do that. And one of the things that they do at that center is really talk about Lewis's first point, which is fair play and harmony between other people in the workforce. So let me give you an example. One of my husband's groomsmen, so that was a couple years ago, but close friend from college, he's a musician, and he has been in some very prestigious internships and programs around the country, working with really world-renowned composers, conductors, musicians, right? And he said, so I called like I called in all my favors with this. I was like, you've been in an internship in the last decade. Tell me what you thought, right? So this is one of them. And he said that one of the huge struggles for him in the music industry is that internships is where you get opportunities and placements and references, right? And it really is based, at least in his experience, on whether you're willing to sleep with a conductor, composer, or musician, right? Now, you might say, well, that's obviously obvious. That's obviously obvious. That's very clearly obvious, the Christian perspective on that, right? Don't sleep with a composer. That's not going to get you that. Like, that's wrong. Integrity in internships, don't do that. Right? This is like really brilliant stuff here. All right. But it actually isn't that simple, right? Because obviously the answer is no. But the universities, companies, organizations, places where he is, obviously they don't think that's right either, but it's still happening. And that's how the industry he's in goes. So the question for him is, should I blow the whistle? Should I mention this? And in some situations, right, because he didn't sleep around, he doesn't get ahead. And in some situations, it doesn't matter, because frankly, he's good enough, so he doesn't have to give in to that pressure. But regardless, it impacts people around him. Not only the people who are asking, but the people who are responding, right? It influences the whole situation. And so either people are impacted because they gave in, or because they couldn't get ahead because they couldn't make it. So what do you do, right? How, as a Christian, do you handle this situation? You might be able to stay righteous and above reproach, but are you willing to take a stand because of the harm it brings to others, right? What is your social corporate responsibility in that situation? Well, so obviously, Chip and his friend have talked about it, right? And his friend's in a church. He has a mentor who's also a Christian in the industry, right? He's in a church where they talk about these things. And he's part of a music community that are Christians so that they can figure out how to deal with this in the different music communities that they're in around the country. So he can deal with it because he is in community. He can figure out how to bring about fair play and harmony between individuals because he's looked for a mentor, he's looked for a community, and he's talked about this. What is a Christian response there? Okay, well, we all know that this first point isn't the only point in ethics. So Luz goes on to say next that what is good, this is his little thing in Mere Christianity, it says, what is the good of telling the ships how to steer so as to avoid collisions if, in fact, they're just crazy old tubs that cannot be steered at all? What is the good of drawing up on paper rules for social behavior if we know that, in fact, our greed, cowardice, ill temper, and self-conceit are going to prevent us from keeping them, right? That is why we must go on to think of the second part, right, which is the morality inside of us as individuals. So I talked to my sister about this one. She's a pretty good person, pretty morally upstanding, so I thought, yeah, I'll see when she was in college how her internships worked. And another friend both said the same thing. And they said, you know, what they faced in their internships was actually really kind of blasé. It was mostly the integrity of reporting hours. So Jenny said that she really struggled. She was given an internship and she was paid for that internship for a certain number of hours, right? But she could take really long lunches or she could miss an hour here or there. And then what do you do, right? How do you report that hours? You're getting paid for something, you're getting an internship for a certain amount of time, but you're not working that amount of time. And the same thing was true with my other friend. He was doing a law internship, right? Billable hours apparently in law are very important, right? So his boss wants him to report a lot of billable hours because that's how you make money in the law firm. And he was like, but can I really call that a billable hour? I went into a Starbucks and got a latte, right? But it helped me think. So he was like, how do I honestly report billable hours in my internship, right? And to make things complicated, his boss is a Christian, right? So it's not just if you work for a Christian, no ethical situations to deal with, right? So again, both of them said, and I love this because it helps me with my talk, they both said, you know what was really important for us was to struggle through that in our internships because now we have to struggle with it in our work, but we've created a habit. We've created a habit of doing the right thing. So now it's easier, or now at least I think about it, right? So they both said really helped in the internship to have to deal with that, because now in our work situation where the stakes are a lot higher, it is easier. Okay, so Lewis's last point is that even if the ships are running okay and they're in good working order and they're not running into each other, if they don't know their purpose or their end goal, they're going to end up in the wrong place or playing the wrong type of music. Which reminds me of what we were talking about in Hebrews, right? Because we're talking about the human and being made in the image of God. So God made us in his image to rule over and steward the earth and everything and everyone in it. But we got it wrong, right? Our harmonizing inside ourselves went wrong. So we started sinking other ships. And ultimately we lost what it meant to be truly human. So we gave up our role as humans. But, right, God became man, right? So because of Christ, this changed. God became man, and he lived the perfect human life and died so that we might become truly human again and do what God called us to do. But many of the internships I'm guessing that you have been in or will be in, or I don't know, I guess those are the only two options, have been in, might not be working with companies who are particularly concerned with fulfilling Genesis 1, 27 and 28, right? They're probably not like, how can we make you in the image of God? And how can we get you to make everybody else you interact with more like Jesus? So part of acting with integrity is really considering whether or not you can honestly fulfill God's calling and vocation in a company who's out to exploit the poor, the environment, things like that, right? You have to think about that. Like, can I really do this, even an internship in this company? And there are going to be lots of different answers to that question for different Christians too, right? So a friend of mine, her father, is a guy named Gideon Strauss. And he's from South Africa, and he was there during the apartheid regime. So he talks about one of his first workplace situations in his late teens. And this is what he said. I'm just going to read it because I think it's really good. He said, I made a conscientious objection against serving in the military of the apartheid South Africa, and as a result did community service for 3.5 years in the late 1980s in the compliance office of the apartheid government's Department of Labor. My immediate office colleagues and supervisors were, at least avowedly, right, enthusiastic supporters of the policies of the government. And at the time, and in the immediate preceding years, I was an active participant in the anti-apartheid movement, albeit small and relatively insignificant ways, which I don't think is actually true. I think he did a lot for it, but that's what he said. So this early workplace raised big questions for me. The Department of Labor, including the office where I worked, was part of the state apparatus of apartheid. While I was legally able to refuse to help prop up the political regime by force of arms, I was nonetheless complicit in administrating its laws. No matter how small a cog I was in the machinery of racial discrimination, I nonetheless contributed by the virtue of the work I was doing with these colleagues to the oppression and exploitation of the black South Africans. In a way, I could not avoid or deny I belonged to this work community and served its purposes. So now he's actually in the States now, and he works for a think tank helping others consider their work from a Christian perspective, right? He says in an article, our work connects us to larger and fiercer worlds where we are forced to remember first priorities. If we are serious about our work, we tend to find ourselves apprenticed to something larger than we previously imagined, something seemingly raw and overpowering. And so he suggests, after these questions, and I think this really fits in with Lewis's 3 categories here, and particularly with a human purpose, he says, is it possible, this is a question we need to ask ourselves when doing internships or working, is it possible to be a human being fully alive in the business or marketplace that I'm helping to shape, right? Or are we diminishing the humanity of people involved in our business, marketplace, national or global economies, right? So those are really important questions to ask when you get involved in an internship or a company. So it's important to think, right, about these 3 parts of morality, according to Lewis, as you choose and participate in internships, right? So we're supposed to you really need to think about it, right, is individual responsibility, social responsibility, and the telos, right, or the goal or purpose of what it means to be human. Okay, so what does this mean practically to act ethically in internships? How can you be a person of integrity as you intern? Well, good choices aren't difficult, right? Sometimes they aren't as difficult when you're surrounded by community giving you meaning and when you have a history of prior choices, right? So making the right choice is almost impossible without a community or without forming habits, right? Okay. So I thought for our last couple of minutes here, we would look at a case study. Oh no, other way. Oh. It's not up there. Solomon. We're going to look at Solomon in the Old Testament, right? Why not? Solomon. He's great. So it's in 1 Kings if you're interested in looking it up, but I'm just going to read some of it. So many of you might remember Solomon. He's David's son with Bathsheba, and he takes over the throne when David dies. So at the beginning, and this is recorded in chapter 3 of 1 Kings, he says, God comes to him and says, ask me what I shall give you. And Solomon's response, does anybody remember? Yeah, he asked for wisdom. And God said, and God's really pleased, right? He asked for wisdom. It's a good thing to ask for, right? It pleases God. And so God responds by saying, because you've asked for this and not asked for yourself long life or riches, or the life of your enemies, right? But have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right. Now I'm going to do this according to your word, right? I'm going to give you wisdom and a discerning mind so that there's none like you before or after, right? But I'm also going to give you riches and honors so that no other king shall compare to you in all your ways. And if you walk in my ways and if you keep my statutes, right, he says, I'll even lengthen your days. So essentially, because Solomon asks for wisdom, he gets it all, right? Which is good. I always thought when reading this story, I'm always going to ask for wisdom. Like if God ever shows up to me, wisdom is my response, right? Because I want the other things. So I think maybe that's a little twisted. But okay, so interestingly, wise Solomon, he's very wise. And right afterwards, it tells an example of his wisdom. He happens to also be the compiler of the book of Proverbs, which makes sense, right? Because they're a book of wisdom. And he wrote it, okay, or compiled it. So in Proverbs 4, I have a bookmark here, I think. Proverbs 4, I love this chapter. It's called A Father's Wise Instruction, right? So the first thing you notice there is he has a mentor. It's his father, but it's still a mentor, right? He's in community. He's not out there hanging out on his own trying to figure out. His father is giving him advice. So again, mentor, really important. Okay, so Proverbs 4 talks about if you follow wisdom, when you walk, you will not be hampered, and when you run, you will not stumble, right? And he also says, do not enter the path of the wicked, and do not walk in the ways of the evil. Avoid it. Don't go near it. Turn away from it and pass on, right? He says, ponder the path of your feet, then all your ways will be sure. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Turn your foot away from evil. Right? And just an interesting thing about this Proverbs is that, I don't know, so I live like next to the Whale. Do you guys know where that is? Okay, and if I want to get from my house to Cafe Romeo's, which is of course what I want to do all the time because they have great coffee, I walk down to the Whale and then I cut through behind. And I must not be the only one who does this because there is a thick path that's cut through no grass, dirt, and it's even grooved in, right? Do you know what I'm saying? So that's what this is talking about, right? It's talking about don't swerve from the path. And as you walk, right, what's going to happen? You're going to cut a path, and then it's going to go deeper and deeper and deeper. So there's this idea of like, almost like wagon ruts, right? And so you're walking on the way, right? And you're in that rut. So you can run, and you can know where it's going because there's this worn path. You're not like cutting your own way. But interestingly, what happens if you get out of that rut in a good way? What if you get out of that rut? What happens? You've lost your way, right? You don't know where you are anymore. And so Proverbs here is saying, run in that path, run in that way, and then you won't be swayed to either way. You'll be able to avoid evil. Okay, so interestingly, right, you might remember what happens to Solomon. What happens to Solomon? Does he stay wise all of his years? Well, I guess he does, but he has some pretty fatal flaws. So conventional wisdom of the day says, that you should marry women of your allies, right? But God clearly says to the kings of Israel to marry one woman because he doesn't want them to form political alliances. Well, what does Solomon do? How many wives does a man have? Yeah, a ton, right? Like so many. You can't even count them, right? You can't remember. It's a lot. And he has a lot of concubines too. So he has so many, aka he has a ton of allies, a ton of political alliances. And he also those women bring in their foreign religions. And so he starts worshiping, he's pulled away from God, right? So the culture starts to get to him, right? And just thinking about it really quickly, I was like, oh, what's interesting is David has prophets come to him, kind of like community, come to him and challenge him. But Solomon doesn't seem to have that. Maybe isn't listening to community. There's no one around him saying, hey, stop doing this. The people he surrounds himself with are like, worship our gods, right? And so here, again, we see the importance of forming community and also forming habits. Solomon, I think, forms good habits, which is why we see so much success coming from his kingdom, because he is really wise and he makes really good decisions. But then he is pulled away from that. And interestingly, so we know that the second part is kind of messed up for Solomon. He starts worshiping other gods. But we also know the first part has gone awry too, because when he dies and his son comes to power, a whole bunch of people come to that son and say, we can't handle the amount of work that your father oppressed us with, right? And if you keep it up, we're leaving. And the son's like, yeah, I'm going to make it worse. And so they leave, right? So we know that Solomon went awry on the top too. So the first top two, he went awry because he wasn't surrounding himself with community. He wasn't coming back to God. He wasn't integrous in his work. So what I really want you to see is as we talk about internships and what we're going to do is I have come up with some scenarios. I actually should give credit to my lovely husband because he was actually the one who called up a bunch of his friends in these fields and was like, hey, we're trying to do... So anyway, he came up with these. But they're based on our friend's real life experience in the workforce. And I thought this would be fun. This is what I want to do, right? Because what I really want you to do is to think about what it means to act with integrity in relationships. And what I want you to do with that is start forming habits now, and also to be in community, Christian community. And I want you to have a mentor, right? Like, I think those are all really important things. So I want you to start talking with each other, because this is hopefully something you'll do for the rest of your lives in your workplace. And as we know as Christians, right, that we learn from how God is working in the lives of other people. And so I think it would be fun, just humor me, to spend, like, I don't know, just cluster 5 or 6 of you. This should be cool because, you might get to learn something about someone next to you. So here they are, legal. You're interning with a large law firm in New York. As part of your internship, you're tasked with helping a legal team donate time to Briefs for Marriage Equality. How do you participate, right? You could be in a group where there are going to be a lot of good answers, a lot of different answers about how you do that, right? Okay, engineering, assisting the CEO. You're asked to evaluate 10 of the full-time staff. The top 2 will receive promotions, the bottom 2 will lose their jobs. How do you respond? Finance, interning for a financial advisor, you are tasked with creating a clean profile? Yeah, for a portfolio, for a high-profile Christian leader. How do you determine clean versus unclean, right? If that doesn't make sense, hopefully there's a finance person in there, but I think it means like, are you using like gambling associations in your, right? Or do you use companies that use slave labor? Or are they dumping chemicals into the water but making millions of dollars? Offshore drilling? I don't know. Okay. All right, science. I'm not in these fields, so I'm like the Old Testament girl. My ethical issues in internships were like how to appropriately interpret a Hebrew word. Okay, so science. Your team has been researching an HIV vaccine. During the course of your internship, you learn the team has been using embryonic stem cells. Journalism. Your editor asks you to run a series of articles on leaked closed letter in which a small group of business leaders petition their state congressperson for birth control exemptions. Your editor wants you to characterize the company as misogynistic and call for a boycott. Do you agree? If not, how do you dissent? Okay, so these are all like, clearly some of them you can figure out, but these are all situations that our friends, have faced. Okay? So we have, and I want you to think about, we have a couple minutes. What I want you to think about is thinking about fair play between groups of people, between individuals, harmonizing within yourself, and then the whole point, like the telos of human purpose. How would you answer these questions? Thinking about forming habits and going to God and community, a Christian community. Okay? Go. Groups of like 6. And then we're going to come back and talk about